Hello, this is Katherine, and you're with us on Climate Action Figures.
Hello and welcome to the newest edition of Climate Action Figures. I am your host, as always, John Whidden, and today you get to meet Dr. Katherine Arbuthnot, Professor Emerita at the University of Saskatchewan and one of the co-founders of EcoStress Sask. But first, this week's quick fix from Barbara in Edmonton, who emailed Climate Action Figures to say, as I wait for the water to heat up for my dishes, I catch the excess water in my watering can. I also save the water from boiling eggs as it is good for my plants. One of my plants is over 50 years old. Well, congratulations on having such an elderly plant, Barbara. That's wonderful. And thank you very much for sharing that. Very important tip, because we're heading into a season, at least in Western Canada, where there is likely to be a lot of drought. So that should be a great quick fix for all of us this summer. Welcome, Katherine. What do you think about Barbara's quick fix today?
Well, I think that's very clever, and I'm sure her plants are very grateful to her for collecting water that way.
Now, Katherine, this podcast has its roots in research that highlighted the anxiety that young people particularly are feeling about the state of the environment these days. It would seem that not only young people are feeling this type of stress. As a psychologist, tell us about your perspective on that.
Well, you're certainly right that there is good research, and there's a very high proportion of young people that are very anxious and concerned about climate change. For older people, we may not talk about it as climate change, but I suspect there's not very many people in either of our provinces that aren't worried about the forest fire season that's starting earlier, or the drought, or those sorts of things, although they may not think about that as climate change or environmental. We're certainly all anxious and worried about consequences.
Right. However we choose to name it, that doesn't take away from the fact that many people are feeling that kind of stress. Now, speaking of stress, you co-founded an organization called EcoStress Sask. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, what it is basically we set up small support groups for people to talk about their anxiety or their grief or their anger, whatever stress they're experiencing as a result of climate change or environmental degradation around them, because it's fairly difficult publicly in Saskatchewan, because it's not kind of normative for us to talk openly about our anxiety about climate change. But we do need to talk about it with others. It really helps.
Now, Katherine, clearly you have spoken with a lot of people about this. Do you get a sense of what it is that is causing so much stress around this topic?
Well, one of the things that comes up really frequently is given the obvious increase of the problems related to climate change and the urgency of the situation, one of the things that really distresses people is the lack of action. That we've known about this for quite a long time. It seems to be accelerating, and still we are not doing enough, we're told by many others, to help get us out of the worst of the situation that we're in and the situation where we're heading. So the lack of action by our leaders and by our institutions, infrastructure, really distresses people quite a lot.
Now, Katherine, Amy Snyder introduced us, and my understanding is that Amy had this brainchild of EcoStress Sask and got you involved. Do you want to give us a bit of a background on that?
Sure. Amy herself was feeling very distressed. It was the summer of the big forest fires in BC. She and her family often go out to BC to recharge, and all of the places they go were filled with forest fires. And so she was very, very distressed by that. And she wanted to talk to other people about it and discovered that there really wasn't any place local for her to do that. So she called Russell Charlton, who she knew, who was doing at the time his graduate studies in educational psychology. He agreed that there was a need for this. And then the two of them called me to say they had this idea and would I be willing to come on board? And I was delighted to do that. I thought this was a really great idea. We're kind of a support group organization so that we collect a group of people, 10 or so on a Zoom call once a week for 8 weeks, and then continuing a little less frequently than that for people just to talk to each other about their experiences, the kinds of stress that they're encountering, and just making connections with others who are, as one of them said it, understand what's going on and are also feeling emotional about it.
Well, that sounds like a wonderful support for folks. Clearly, you have spoken with many people about this. What is the common thread? Is there something that you hear over and over again?
The thing I hear most commonly is people are very distressed about the lack of action on our situation. Among our leaders, both locally and nationally and globally, that we really are not changing our ways fast enough to stop the processes of climate change. And so we're just scrambling to adapt as it comes along. And people are very demoralized by that, discouraged by that.
I should mention, Katherine, that we were connected to your organization by Claire Kratz, who has been a part of one of your sessions, and she said it was okay if we share that. So we'll give a shout out to Claire here today.
Yes, she's an amazing woman. She has participated in the session. So she's one of our alumni, and I want to include my own gratitude and thanks. She is an amazing climate figure.
So if a listener is feeling this kind of anxiety that you describe about climate change, perhaps they're upset because no one seems to be doing enough about it in our leadership, what advice would you give them?
Well, Amy has a very succinct way to say it. The two things we need to do are find others and take action. We see our organization in the find others category, but as we meet, people do talk about the action that they're taking, and action taken with others is often very helpful to deal with the kind of stress and grief and anxiety that we're experiencing.
Well, that seems a perfect segue into your climate action, because we always like to ask our guests, what is a small action you're taking to mitigate climate change? So what would be your action that you'd like to share with us today, Katherine?
Well, I guess my most unusual climate action, which I've been doing now for, a very long time, is I use super slow fashion, that my ecological footprint on clothing would be tiny. Most of the things I wear, I have had for decades. And there's two things I do to make sure my clothes are that durable. One is when I wash them, I always hang them to dry, which both saves wear and tear on the clothes. And also in this very dry climate, we always can use the humidity from the drying clothes. And secondly, I really love to repair things because I wear my clothes for a long time. I get very attached to them. I really like them. And so when they start to wear out, I get to problem solve the particular kind of wear they're having and then fix them. And so I really enjoy the process, and it really keeps my beloved clothing going for longer and longer. So super slow fashion.
sometimes in these days that are not so super slow, we don't take the time to learn those skills that so many of our ancestors had about repairing things that need some slight repair. I guess also your energy use is down when you're not using your dryer all the time to dry your clothes as well, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Since you have become something of an expert on clothes, can you give us any tips on if we want to buy clothes that will last, that are better for the environment? What suggestions would you give us?
I get my clothing from a number of different places, including I have bought a lot through used clothing. So you just look for things that seem fairly well made, that the seams aren't letting go, that kind of thing. And then if you treat them kindly, they'll last. You don't need to buy really expensive things. You just need to treat them well, just like most of us.
Right. Treat them well and choose things that are well built, I guess is what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is there a certain type of fabric that's better than others to use?
Well,
I think cotton would be more natural than synthetic poly, but what do you think about that?
Well, and because I have clothes from so long ago, I don't have a lot of the kind of plastic clothing that has come onto fashion lately, so I'm less familiar with those kinds of things. But any natural fibers, so like cotton, bamboo, linen, wool, all of those kind of natural fibers evolved here and evolved with us, so they're pretty durable.
Before we let you go, Katherine, we need to ask, with all of the stress about the environment that you've studied and seen in others and maybe even felt in yourself, what gives you hope?
Well, actually, one of the things that has really built my hope since we started EcoStress is meeting so many passionate, talented, smart people with so many diverse focuses and talents that are addressing these events. It's not as clear where I live that there's a lot of citizens that are really working very hard and have climate actions so firmly in their mind and in their heart. But there are lots of us. We're like the root systems of the grassland itself, that we may not be seen in the public, but there are really a lot of people working to make the world safer for everybody. So that gives me a lot of hope.
A wonderful analogy to wrap up on the root systems of our natural prairie grassland. If someone wants to get in touch with EcoStress Sask, how would they do that, Katherine?
We have a website or an email address. They're both the same, EcoStress with 3 S's, Sask, EcoStress Sask, all one word, .ca. So that will get both our email or put a www in front of that, and that gets our website.
Perfect. So the 3rd S is the beginning of the Sask, right?
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise.
Most welcome. I've enjoyed our conversation.
And dear listener, thank you for joining us. If you know of someone who would enjoy this podcast, please do share. And we will be back again next week, same time, same place, to hear from another climate action figure. Until then,
go figures.
This has been Climate Action Figures. Our show is produced and hosted by John Whidden. Our creative consultant is Kayla McIntosh. Our theme song is Hawaii Vacation by Tovari. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube at Climate Action Figures. That's all one word. And if you have any other questions or comments that arose from this or any episode, feel free to reach out to us at climateactionfigures@gmail.com. And thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another Climate Action Figure.